Hello, welcome to NOTCAST. I think it's 26. It's the 2nd of December 2020. I'm here going to talk about U2's second album, which is called October. Now, if I was a devious bastard and had planned this more in advance, I would have done this about 6 weeks ago when it was actually October, and I could have got away with telling you that I'd planned it all along as part of my evil, devious, cunning plan. But I'm not so calculating, I'm afraid. For example, if I wanted to be a James Bond bad guy, I would have got a white cat instead of black cat. But what can you do? We met a black cat and he looked at us and we looked at him and we were like, oh mate, and then it was all history after that. You're not interested in my cat? I don't know why I'm telling you about that. So instead I'm going to talk about the second U2 album, which is called October, and to kind of brain dump lots of information that I found off Wikipedia, because I don't know anything. I'm just very good at remembering and reciting it. And I was saying the other day, actually, is that sometimes doing these videos, it doesn't feel like I'm actually accumulating any knowledge or I know anything. I'm just kind of like a binge drinker with information. I'm just absorbing it all and then I'm passing it all back out to you, and hopefully doing it in some kind of concerted fashion. So it kind of feels like sitting an oral exam where I have to talk knowledgeably about a subject for about 45 minutes, and I don't really comprehend what I'm saying. I'm just kind of parrot repeating the things that I've learned by reading it off the internet, and if it's on the internet, it must be true. And so be it. What a strange life it is indeed. Okay, so U2's second album is called October. I've mentioned that 3 times already in less than 2 minutes, so I must be really repeating myself. And the album came out in around about October 1981. It's U2's second album. It's suffers from, I think, the thing that a lot of people have, which is that you spend your first 18 years writing your first album and the next 18 months writing the second album. And second albums have notoriously a very tough ride in the world, because it's largely made out of songs that they had kind of in the backs of their pockets for the second album. Now, if you're Noel Gallagher, by the way, you write 3 full albums when you're still a teenager, and then the drugs kick in and you release Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, and everybody realises that the first few songs you wrote were the only really great songs that you wrote. That's not strictly true, by the way. There are some great late period Oasis songs, but I think we can all say that Be Here Now is very definitively a cocaine album, and it's too long, and it's got more songs on it than were actually written. And some second albums kind of have that as well, some of them. And I think by the time you get to about the 3rd or 4th album, it really works out whether the band are great or whether the band are just living off an initial flush of success. Jane's Addiction, for example, wrote pretty much all of the songs on their first 3 albums, Triple X, Nothing Shocking, and Ritual de la Habitual, in the early days of the band. So, for example, the centrepiece of their 3rd album, Ritual de la Habitual, is a track called 3 Days. And that was written in 1986, when the band had been going for about 8 months. But they realised they had to get people up to speed with where they were going. So, they're going, this song's going on the 3rd album, in the way that when Oasis wrote All Around the World, everyone's like, oh, you should put it out right now, it's brilliant. No, that's going on the 3rd album. And if you're the kind of band that can stockpile songs of that quality, then you've got some way to go. Whereas October was, I think, the notoriously difficult second album. A lot of bands have a difficult second album. Morris's second solo album, Kill Uncle, is by no standard one of the best records that's ever been released. Sorry, Moz, but that's how it is. And so October is by my standards, is probably my least favourite U2 album. It's still really good, by the way, and by the standards of other bands, it's really quite strong, but it's not my favourite U2 album. In fact, I'd probably rank it as my least favourite, so the bottom of the pile. Now I'm going to explain why as we kind of come into it. First and foremost, I think lyrically the album is quite unfocused. Now there's an excuse behind that, which is that Bono had his briefcase of lyrics stolen but he later said that actually that was probably more covering for the fact that he wasn't quite sure what to write about or how to write about it. And so a lot of the lyrics that we have on this album are unformed. Some of them are improvised in the recording studio as they happen, such as the song Tomorrow. It's only afterwards that he kind of realised what he was actually singing about, which was his mother's funeral on that song. And there's a lot of space on this record, so sonically it's a far sparser, far wider record than Boy had all the songs on it had been played umpteen times near enough by the time it had been released and recorded. The band were very, very familiar with those songs, whereas on October they hadn't really had the time to work those songs through. That many of those songs they hadn't played live before they recorded them, and so therefore the arrangements were uncertain. They hadn't been as tested to destruction. Nobody had really gone and worked through some of the arrangements that we've got. So the first show on the October tour, which was at Slane Castle on the 16th of August 1981, supporting, I think, Thin Lizzy. They played With a Shout, I Threw a Brick, Gloria, Rejoice, October, for the first time in an open door show in front of about 80,000 people. Very brave. But in retrospect, they've also said that was one of the worst shows that they ever played. Obviously, I was only 7 or 8 at the time, so I wasn't there. But very, very possible that it was a bad show. Certainly, it's very, very ballsy to play 5 or 6 new songs that no one's ever heard, that you've only just finished recording, that you've not really properly rehearsed at an open air outdoor gig. No wonder that's not one of the best shows that they've ever played. And also I think you can kind of see that the band's troubles with this album are kind of obvious all the way through it. So right from the cover art that we've got, to track listing and sequencing, the lyrics, the whole thing, it's an album that's very uncertain about the band and the world and the band's place in the world. So lyrically, it's chock full of songs which are questioning. Now, it feels to me that it's missing the magic a little bit, or their potential around what they can achieve. The arrangements are very empty in many ways, and so, for example, the lyrical and vocal focus isn't as finely tuned as it was on Boy. Some of the lyrics really do feel like they're early drafts of lyrics as opposed to finished versions. It kind of feels actually like a really expensive set of demos. And you know, the fact that the lyrics aren't printed on the sleeve, which is something which, you know, U2 have put on almost all of their albums, actually, is lyrics on the sleeves. Are not on the sleeve to this, presumably because they feel that the lyrics didn't necessarily stand up to being transcribed and written. I feel that the songs probably weren't played enough, actually. The arrangements and songs are probably about 90% there. And that means that unlike any of the other albums, it has a lack of clear, directed, lyrical, vocal focus. And as I said, the arrangements are quite empty. So there's a lot of space in those arrangements. Now, the rhythm section, Larry and Adam, really strong. Adam's really playing a lot of lead bass at times, but then he's compensating almost for, you know, where perhaps the guitar parts aren't perhaps as strong or as full as perhaps we've come to expect from U2. And sometimes less is more, and sometimes less is less, and so, you know, the bass is more dominant, the rhythm parts are more complicated, but when you listen to the 1990 demos, which I'll address in another episode whenever that is, what you can really hear is that actually the rhythm section often leads the band in ways that you wouldn't necessarily know. So, for example, when the Edge is writing at home these days, or when the band are writing at home these days, they have recordings at their home studios of, you know, say, for example, Edge is trying to play a guitar part, he will have recordings of Adam and Larry, not a drum sequence type thing, but he'll have, you know, hours and hours of loops of Adam and Larry playing that he can then click to, and he can go, right, I'm going to listen to this rhythm, I'm going to go, what does this? So it really makes the, you know, the songwriting process more efficient. But what we have with this is really a, you know, a lack of time, I think, forced the band's hands a little bit. And the test of time is, you know, how often has the songs from this album been played live, and, you know, how many of them do they still play live today? Most of it often sounds like it's kind of Boy B-sides with a couple of A-sides in, almost like the Smiths' Hatful of Hollow. It's like the leftover songs from the first album, which isn't strictly true. but what it did do is it put the band kind of almost in a crisis of faith. Now, when they were recording this album, Edge apparently left the band for a few days, although he didn't really tell the rest of the band. And Bono was also kind of thinking, well, if Edge isn't in the band, I'm not necessarily interested in being in the band either. And so, it was a make or break moment. And I think the band felt that collectively they had something that was quite spiritual when they were performing. And so they decided that they were going to stick with it and try and reconcile the perhaps two polar opposites of being a spiritual Christian and also playing in a big, dumb, loud rock band. Now they have a phrase. I think they call them the squeakies, the squeaky clean people that don't drink, don't party, don't have nights out. And what they've done is they've kind of reconciled their faith and belief with that lifestyle, and reached a middle ground around it. And some of the riffs on this album, I almost said the lyrics, some of the riffs on this are really simplistic. And by the way, there is nothing wrong with simplistic riffs. If you listen to Elevation, the riff on that is incredibly simple. It's just a descending and ascending chord structure. Very, very simple, but it's all in the effects box. And I think one of the things that we've got with this album is that the band are learning how to construct songs using sound as opposed to construct songs using melody and riff. So a lot of what makes this record U2 sits in the production and the sound and the arrangements, not in the songwriting. And it's what you leave out is just as important as what you leave in. No one could say that David Gilmour or Edge or anyone else would be a better guitar player if they played twice as many notes in the same space. Sometimes you've got to let the songs breathe, and you've got to give that moment and that pause and that reflection. Now, I think I might have mentioned in Boy, when I was talking about action sequences in movies, I definitely talked about it in the album sequencing episode. Action sequences in movies, they need a moment where everyone kind of looks at each other and goes back into it. And this album has got a couple of really strong moments like that. It's got Tomorrow and it's got the October title track, which are almost like moments of respite from the sound that the band are putting together. But it's not what's in the instruments, it's what's in the fingers, really. It's the most important thing is not what instrumentation you've got, it's what the fingers are doing. If you think that the genius of Stephen King comes from his typewriter and not from his fingers, then you don't necessarily fully grasp a fully creative life. And there's a concept of multiple discovery, by the way, or simultaneous discovery in art, in science, in lots of other things, where 2 or 3 or 4 or multiple people all arrive at roughly the same conclusion at roughly the same time. So, for example, Tesla and Edison both discovered forms of electricity around about the same time. The PlayStation and I think the Genesis were both kind of came to market roughly the same time, VHS and Betamax. So what we have actually is a lot of things. Well, actually, Deep Impact and Armageddon. Now, both of those films were made completely separately by people that weren't talking to each other, both about people that go off into space to go and stop a huge comet, stroke meteor, stroke great big bloody rock thing from destroying the Earth. They all came at the same time, and yet somehow it's all from the concept of multiple discovery. Now, U2 are doing the same kind of thing here. They're exploring the same kind of sonic textures and sounds that a lot of their contemporaries are exploring, but they're all doing it at roughly the same time, and they're coming up with there or thereabouts really the same conclusions that we've got around it. And it's not that U2 were an alternative band. They weren't, but they were a small band at this point. And U2, by their very name, didn't want to be exclusive. They didn't want to be anything other than a very inclusive band. U2, it's in the name, isn't it? Really. And they wanted to be huge, and they wanted to be able to demonstrate complete artistic control, which they did do. Now, the cover for this, by the way, is a cover that they've later changed their minds about. But the band's Island Records tried to talk the band out of using this as the cover art for the album, and can you blame them, really? It's a very dated cover. Now, there's a lot to be said for not having pictures of the band on the cover of the albums, certainly when you've got hairstyles that were very prevalent in the 80s, or use of certain clothing or whatever. One of the great things about the 80s was how it sounded, but one of the worst things about the 80s was how it looked. And since I spent 10 years in there, I feel comfortable saying that the 80s was, certainly for me at least, the decade where I had my biggest fashion mistakes, but luckily there's no photographic evidence of that at all. And what we saw with this album was a real massive crisis of faith. Is that the band were addressing their belief system, their ethics, their belief in God, their relationship with God, and their identity and how they were going to address that. And so a lot of these songs are questions to God. Even the last song on the album is called "Is That All?" and that's kind of just sums up almost like some of the questions that we've got around it. Now, in I think the Bill Flanagan book, Until the End of the World, which was published about the Zoo TV tour, one of the statements from them is that I think Bono said, we realised that if we replaced God with you, all of our songs about faith became love songs. So even lines like from where the streets have no name, where I go there, I want to go there with you. That's almost a song of religious conviction. So a lot of their love songs are love songs too, or almost two songs about belief and identity and responsibility and ethics and understanding and your belief system in the face of the world. Really strong in that respect. And when you listen to this, it's soaking in the grooves. Is that the sense that the band have a spiritual existence? There's let's think. Rejoice is on there. Is That All? As I've said, Tomorrow, October. These are all songs which address that element of it. But it's not my favourite U2 album. In fact, it's probably my least favourite U2 album because it's got that lack of focus around it. And I want to kind of talk through some of the things which are there. But I've spent 15 minutes, a third of this already, talking about the album without really talking about the first single that came out from the album. So the first single that came out from the album was Gloria, which is quotes liberally from Bible scripture, I think, and it's backed with a version of I Will Follow, which is recorded live. It doesn't tell you where. I presume it's the version which later became a hit single and an A-side in its own right in the Netherlands. And what you actually see is when you look at that and you look at the album cover, it's very clearly it's taken from the same kind of sessions that were there. In fact, it is a reversed version of the album cover, but stuck through a mirror. So much it's distorted, very similar to the US cover of Boy, actually taking that concept of 4 images and bending and distorting them to make them look a little different. Now, when Island or CBS, depending on which version you're buying, tried to talk the band out of using the cover of October, the band, I think, did capitulate. I think it's probably the best way to look at it. They compromised and they said, well, you can choose the cover for the single, and the cover that they chose for the next single is this, which is Fire, and I think this actually would make a great cover for the October album. It's quite nondescript as a cover. You're not quite sure what you're looking at. Clearly that's a solar flare, and on the back it's an image of what looks like a beach, and for some reason I think that this image is like evocative of a nuclear explosion, and this is evocative of the beaches that they had the nuclear explosion tests on. Now I could be completely wrong. I could be reading something that clearly isn't there into it. Wouldn't be the first time someone's done it with U2. Definitely won't be the last either. This is the second single, which is also backed with live tracks. So you can almost say that the band very clearly had a lack of material that they were covering. There's a double 7-inch that's inside a single 7-inch sleeve here on the UK version, and the 7-inch has Fire. Oh, hang on, I've got this the wrong way around. It's got Fire there, and it's got the B-side, which is called Jay Swallow, and I think Jay Swallow is a largely improvised version of a song where they play one of the other songs or one of the unreleased songs at a different speed and then play another track over the top of it. They really didn't have that much material. But this here, the second 7-inch, actually is a real beauty. So these were all recorded in Boston in March 1981. And a lot of these later appeared on the expanded version of October, which was released in 2008. So this has Cry and the Electric Company on. And the Cry is a song that's never been released in an official studio form. The opening riff from Cry was later recycled and turned into Is That All? So every time that you hear the band play Cry / Electric Company, you're also hearing them play Is That All? And sometimes there's been whole decades when that's been the only song off October that they played. Is a song that isn't actually on the album, and a song that they never actually released. But But Cry became almost like an intro to Electric Company and has stayed there ever since. So that's the A side of the second 7-inch, and on the B side is 11 o'clock TikTok and the Ocean, which was the end of the show, where each member of the band stopped playing and one by one left the stage, which became a ritual that the band later picked up on some of their other tours, such as ending with 40, which they've done as recently as 2015. So it's a common thing. The release of Fire also brought around the band's first 12-inch single, which is called U2 Rock, or U2 ROK, depending on your points of view. And I think this was only released in America and Germany and some other places. I don't understand the cover for this. It's pretty damn generic, actually, isn't it? It looks like it could have been made by, the junior art director guy in an afternoon with a load of coffee. And clearly it's advertising, the album Boy on there. And it's repeated on the other side. Now, it's called U2 Rock, but it also could be U2 ROK at the point where the bands were not 100% in control of everything that was released with their name on it. Later on, U2 ROK was released as a CD single. So in the late 80s, a lot of the earlier 12 inches were released as CD singles. And this was one of the first CD singles that was released, probably around about 1987, 1988. I remember seeing this in the import racks of HMV and thinking, I'll never get to own a copy of that. I only had to wait about 30 years before I got one. Now, October, as such, was also released on CD. Now, I've used the liberty of changing the CD booklet so that the cover to October on my CD looks just like that. And I'm going to be a little cheeky here, and I'm going to kind of explain what I do. Is that really I just look through the booklet and I go, what is a better image than the cover photograph? Because frankly, there's some terrible, terrible hair there. Now, you could say I'm just jealous of their hair. I'm not. Just really awful hairstyles. And this photograph here, by the way, was shot at the Grand Canal Docks in Dublin, and the imagery there was shot on the Grand Canal Docks in Dublin. It's publicly accessible land. Looks very, very similar to now. If you wanted to go to Dublin and recreate the album cover for October, and you have 4 wigs, by all means go ahead and do it. I think the past at least 2 or 3 times I've been to Dublin, I've visited that site and stood exactly where those photographs have been taken, with a sense of I'm standing in a U2 album cover. It's quite weird, actually, standing in the place where an album cover was shot. Sometimes it really, really doesn't feel like it. I went to see Pink Floyd's Their Mortal Remains exhibition a few years ago, and what I later realised is that one of the exhibitions, the way in which it was constructed, actually became the cover of The Delicate Sound of Thunder Blu-ray and DVD reissue. So I've stood in a Pink Floyd album cover and a U2 album cover, and that's a pretty strange place to be. So I'm just popping the 7-inch singles back inside Fire, and again just reminding you that's probably a better photograph and probably a better cover for October than the one that was actually used. And the band themselves said that they should have listened to the label and taken their advice about the album cover, but at the time, having complete artistic control is very, very important, and sometimes you do need to put your foot down and you go, no, this is the vision, this is what I want to communicate. Not quite sure why you would argue so strongly to have the album cover there. Now, this photograph on the back of the CD, by the way, is from a different era of the band, I think. I think it's from 1983, actually. Definitely not the same session that birthed this. If nothing else, Bono's got a hat and he looks more serious, and Adam has had a haircut. But in those days, the release of things on CD wasn't so tightly controlled. Someone would go, well, let's put out the cassette masters that we've got because they aren't mastered for vinyl, and we'll stick that on a CD, and here's a photo, and nobody will really mind, because bands never really thought necessarily about things in those days. So, following from that, I'm going to mention there was a third single, which isn't really a single, but this was probably the rarest studio single by U2. Was recorded in late 1981, I think, and played live in 1981 and 1982, and maybe a bit of early 1983. So a non-album single that followed on from Gloria and Fire was this, A Celebration, which is backed with Trash, Trampoline and The Party Girl. Now, Party Girl is one of those songs that the band play when they feel they're playing a particularly good show, or it's a rare and unusual occasion. I think the last time they played it was at the O2 Arena in London in 2015, and I was there, so I staggeringly lucky as I got to see U2 play Party Girl, which does not happen that often. It only happens a few times on a tour, and it hasn't happened in the past 5 years. Now, some bands, they'll play Party Girl at every gig. U2, as I've kind of said before, are the kind of band that have a lot of very good songs. So Party Girl comes out, one show in 100. New Year's Day in 2015 came out maybe one show in 20. If you've got a song as good as New Year's Day, most bands would be going, right, we're going to play that at the end of every single show. But U2 are just like, no, we don't feel like it, we'll play it another one. Which means that by anyone's absolute standards, October is a bloody good album, but by U2 standards, it's not their best. Now, I'm going to leap forward in time a bit. Here is the 1980 original release. And as you can see, it's got the white space around it. It's got the songs on the front cover. It's got the details on the back. This is the album where they've actually changed the cover. So the 2008 remaster, and this is the 2019 cream vinyl edition, is significantly different. First and foremost, they've got rid of the empty white space. They've taken the song titles off the front and they've put them on the back, and they've changed the fonts and the numbering, and they've redesigned it as well. So you have got on the back, you've got a white space here, but again, it follows a slightly different configuration there. Now this kind of style with the white outline on it really fell out of fashion. It really looks very 1977 to me. It kind of looks like the kind of album cover that you get from Bob Dylan or someone like that. And when the album was repressed in 2008, and again this is the 2019 version on cream vinyl, they changed the cover so that it looked a little less dated. There's some great songs on this, by the way. I haven't really addressed that yet. Some really great songs on it. So there's Gloria, which again is a fade in and a fade out, and as I said, quotes liberally from the Bible, I believe. And they've been playing that as recently as 2018, maybe even 2019. I Fall Down is a song that I think they last played in 1985 in America. I Threw a Brick Through a Window. It's a great song, and it should open the album. Rejoice is a favourite. Again, they haven't played that live since 1982. Fire, I don't think they've played since Dundee in 1983. October they played in 2015, by the way. Scarlet they played in 2010, and I think maybe some shows in 2011 on the 360 tour. So they're still proud of parts of this, and so therefore I've seen I think 3 songs of this played live, which is Gloria and October and the beginning of Is That All, which obviously is The Cry. But they've also played Scarlet in the past decade. There's pretty exciting stuff actually for the band's worst album to still play 4 songs from it in relatively recent history. It's pretty interesting. Most bands we go, we're only going to play Gloria and we're only going to play that every once in a while. Some bands don't play anything off their album, their early albums that embarrass them. Depeche Mode I think don't play. They played maybe 2 songs off Speak and Spell. They don't play anything off A Broken Frame, which is their second album, apart from occasionally a piano version of Leaving Silence. New Order haven't played anything off Movement since about 1987. Again, so some bands are very keen on letting their old history go away. Now, I think the sequencing on this album is quite weak, actually. So I'm going to suggest is actually, if you've got a copy, is I put I Threw a Brick Through a Window as the first song, because that starts on an opening descending drum roll, which then is also reprised at the beginning of Gloria, albeit slightly differently. I then follow the track listing of the album through to side 2, so I actually moved Tomorrow to the end of side 1, and then side 2 I start with Celebration, and then go into With a Shout, and then I kind of bump the October title track through to the end. So you've got, the last song on the album is a gentle piano ballad that is the title song from the album. And I'll post the track listing up in the comments, by the way. But to me, it's the album seems rushed, and it seems to be, just not as strong as some of the other ones. And so therefore it's my least favourite U2 album. And it gives me no pleasure to say that. I wish it was a great one, but it isn't. Now, 2008 saw the first part of the band's reissue programme. Here is the October double CD, which is the longest version of the album, or the most expanded version of the album that's been released. And it's back with several unreleased live songs. So Gloria, I Fall Down, I Threw a Brick, Fire, and October, which I think are recorded at the Hammersmith Palais. On December the 6th, 1982. Then there's radio session versions of With a Shout, Scarlet, and I Threw a Brick, recorded at Maida Vale in September 1981. Now also, by the way, there is an extra song that was recorded at those sessions, which is Boy Girl, which you can find on the internet, not in amazing quality, but I do wish the session version of Boy Girl would have been on here. There is a Celebration, Jay Swallow, Trash Trampoline, the live version of I Will Follow, which was recorded in Boston, which is on the B-side of Gloria, and then there's a second version of I Will Follow at the end, which is recorded in Hatton in Holland for Veronica's Countdown. Well done, Veronica, which was released as a single in the Netherlands. And there's also those live tracks which are from the Boston Paradise, which are The Ocean, The Cry, and 11 O'Clock TikTok. Now the last track that's on this expanded double CD version is Tomorrow, which is a re-recording from 1996 by Bono and Adam Clayton. I'm not quite sure why it's on here, probably because the band needed to pad out and fill the space a little. It really belongs to the pop era. Now, I'm a little frustrated by this for two reasons, one of which there's only 5 songs live from Hammersmith. And there is a whole recording of the whole show from Hammersmith, which is available. And it's available on bootleg CDs, such as this, which is, I think, 12 songs. And also on a BBC radio transcription disc. Here, this is a bootleg. The original proper BBC version costs something like £300. If you want to tell the difference between a bootleg and an original of these, by the way, the bootlegs come with black sleeves here, and the originals have green text on the label, and the track listing of it, well, I did have it somewhere, but that's meant to replicate the BBC transcription version. Now, transcription discs by the BBC were syndicated recordings of live sets which were recorded by the BBC, and in order to so for example, they were broadcast outside of the UK on commercial stations. Commercial stations would pay the BBC to have a copy of this sent to them so they could play it. And the copies were copies were sent on vinyl discs like this. I've also got a bootleg Depeche Mode disc from Hammersmith in 1985. Again, you can tell by the black labels on here. There's a Pink Floyd one, by the way, which you can tell it says vintage Pink Floyd, whereas at the time that it was actually issued by the BBC as a transcription disc, there was no such thing as vintage Pink Floyd. There was just Pink Floyd. Now this is a bootleg of the BBC transcription disc from 1982. This cost me a grand total of £10. If it was original, it would have cost me considerably more than that. But I listen to music for the music. I'm not really that interested by the colour of the label in it. I'm a train spotter in some respects, but I don't have to catch all the trains to do it. There's also this, which is a bootleg LP called U2 Live, which was recorded at Workter Festival in July 1982. I've probably pronounced Workter incorrectly. Please forgive me. I'm sorry. I don't know much Dutch, and there's very little that I can actually say apart from I can't say much Dutch at all, really, which is embarrassing. But isn't that just typical of the Brits? We can't speak any other language apart from British, and we expect everyone to speak British, and we end up just pointing to things and just going toilet and stuff like that, expecting everyone else to understand English, and they're looking at, "You're a stupid English person that doesn't speak, only speaks one language, you speak more than one language." And it's quite embarrassing really how parochial English schools are in not teaching people other languages, and maybe that's even fed into I think perhaps some of the current British exceptionalism that you might see in some of the politics, where we believe that Britain is really, really amazing, whereas Britain is, it's pretty good, but it's not really, really amazing. And I live here. Anyway, I got distracted. This is the recording from the Worcester Festival in 1982. This features Gloria, I Threw a Brick, A Day Without Me, and Cat Dove, which I'm reliably told I cannot pronounce correctly. Rejoice, I Fall Down, The Electric Company I Will Follow, Is That All, and Out of Control, and a bootleg double gatefold sleeve. It's pretty good. Chock full of spelling mistakes. Not often you'll find that. Again, pick that up for about £10. And there's a few things about the October tour which I'm going to quickly say. The band have no shortage of visual material that they can include on these reissues. For example, I think there are 3 shows from the October tour, possibly 4, that were professionally filmed and mixed. So, for example, I think it was Berlin in 1981, Hatton, Worcester, and Roskilde were also all filmed, and at least half an hour of each one of those shows is available. So, quite why they didn't put it on a DVD, I'm not sure, unless they're embarrassed by the hair. And then also there's a number of other soundboard recordings and radio broadcasts from the tour. I wish the whole of Hammersmith would have been released on this. And then you could have put the whole of the BBC disc on there, and then you could have put the extra live material from Boston from the Boy tour on the Boy reissue from 2008 as well. But if wishes were fishes, etc., etc. But you can't have it all. I'm sure they've made a good and valid reason behind it. Perhaps they've all held some material back so they can do box sets when they come to the copyright extension period, which is normally 50 years after the date of performance. That's about it really when it comes to talking about the October album. It's a good album. It's I think it's my least favourite U2 album, but it's a good album, and it maybe suffers a little bit from sequencing. Maybe it suffers a little bit from having an unamazing front cover photo. But it's a good U2 album, and a good U2 album is better than most whole bands' careers. Let me not say the names of those bands, because inevitably there are some bands that actually have just put Google alerts out for their own names, and even if you don't tag them, they will find you and they will tell you what they really think. And they think that somehow that's okay. Look, as soon as you put art out there, you don't own it anymore. It belongs to somebody else. It belongs to the viewer and their understanding and interpretation and the meanings that they bring to it. Which is why REM's the one I love. Should never be played at weddings, and why One is a song about a couple tearing each other apart, but it's somehow seen as a unifying song about infinite love. I'm like, don't you listen to the lyrics? Now I'm sure I'm repeating myself. I've only got about 4 anecdotes. I kind of said earlier, I'm not really a human being. I'm more like a walking Wikipedia of random facts that I kind of remember for short periods of time, throw out a camera and then forget. No, October is a good, solid U2 album. It's not their best album. It's probably their worst album. But it's the sound of a band in crisis and surviving that crisis and addressing that crisis through their lyrics. It's got some really, really good songs on it. So Gloria, I Threw a Brick, October. Love those songs. They're really good. I'd love them to play I Threw a Brick live, but they haven't played it live since about 1983, I think. Again, that's the second U2 album. I will also point out the cream vinyl version of it, I think, is now probably long deleted. They're slowly releasing one by one coloured vinyl versions of all of their albums to time with various record store days, Black Fridays, and other events that are going through at the moment. I think there's coloured vinyl versions of Boy, October, Unforgettable Fire, Joshua Tree, Zeropa, Pop, and How to Dismantle and Atomic Bomb. And no doubt the other albums will come out on various colours of vinyl over time. There's also a clear vinyl 10th anniversary edition of No Line on the horizon, but that will await a future episode. Next time I'm talking with you, I don't know what I'm going to be talking about. Hopefully not U2's War album, but something else. God knows what. And I will catch up with you then, as per usual. Like and subscribe, as Adam Buxton says. Questions, comments, etc., etc. Put them all in the little box below my lovely chatting face, and I will all see you again soon. So thank you very much for U2's October, and for 40 minutes of your time, and I will catch up with you again. Okay, bye.